H.R. 6983, H.R. 7158, H.R. 7180, H.R. 7365, H.R. 7385, H.R. 7417, H.R. 7507, H.R. 7508, H.R. 7606, H.R. 7607, H.R. 7893, H.R. 7938, H.R. 8057, H.R. 8641, H.R. 8717, H.R. 8909, H.R. 8841, H.R. 8868, H.R. 8919, H.R. 8976, H.R. 9285, H.R. 9322, H.R. 7421, H.R. 9487, H.R. 9544, H.R. 9549, H.R. 9580, H.R. 9592, H.R. 9600, H.R. 9775, H.R. 10065. Appointment, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Signed sincerely, Kevin F. McCumber, Acting Clerk.
Yeah. Okay. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or votes objected to under Clause 6 of Rule 20. The House will resume proceedings on postponed questions at a later time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 10545.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 10545, a bill making further continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2025, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, and the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on H.R. 10545.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 10545, the American Relief Act of 2025. This bill provides continuing appropriations to keep the government open and operating through March 14th of 2025. When the House Appropriations Committee began our process of drafting bills for fiscal year 2025, we knew we had to work quickly to put the House in the best position possible. To that end, we successfully reported all 12 of our annual appropriations bills out of committee and succeeded in passing 5 of them across the floor by the House by the end of July. Unfortunately, the House does not act on its own. And I'm sorry to say that whether we like it or not, our colleagues in the Senate have input into the process. To date, the Senate has yet to pass a single fiscal year 2025 appropriations bill across the floor. As time has gone on, we've reached the deadline of December 20th, meaning another extension is necessary. Today's bill extends government funding through March 14th, which will grant Congress the needed time to reach a final agreement on our FY25 spending bills. It will also give President-elect Trump an opportunity to participate in the process. Governing by continuing resolution, Mr. Speaker, is never ideal, but Congress has a responsibility to keep the government open and operating for the American people. The alternative, a government shutdown, would be devastating to our national defense and for our constituents, and would be a grave mistake. Today's bill, Mr. Speaker, avoids such a self-inflicted error. Today's bill will also provide much-needed relief to Americans struggling to recover from recent natural disasters. This includes destruction in my own district, which faced tornadoes that ripped through Oklahoma, and it will especially provide support for communities ravaged by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. The devastation caused by these storms and other disasters is heartbreaking. Congress must act. In this bill, we will provide $100 billion in supplemental emergency disaster funding. This will provide the necessary disaster recovery aid for states and communities as our fellow citizens rebuild and restore. Finally, the bill also provides $10 billion in economic assistance for our farmers and ranchers. In the wake of many natural disasters and a difficult farm economy, our farmers and ranchers are in dire need of economic assistance. While there's still a long road ahead for recovery efforts and rebuilding, this aid will mark a vital step forward and will help preserve family farms and ranches across the country while also continuing to ensure food and agricultural security for our nation. For these reasons, Mr. Speaker, I urge all my colleagues to vote in support of H.R. 10545 today. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this continuing resolution. We had a strong bipartisan and bicameral agreement among the leadership of both parties at both ends of the Capitol to avert a disastrous and pointless government shutdown, to provide desperately needed disaster aid and emergency assistance, and to provide Congress with the time required to enact full-year funding bills for fiscal year 2025, which is our responsibility. That bill was a result of a compromise. There were things in it Democrats liked and Republicans did not. There were things in it Republicans liked that Democrats would have preferred to leave out. But that is the nature of government funding bills. They require compromise, which we did, which we accomplished, and the support of Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate in order to become the law of the land. That was true throughout the 118th Congress, despite Republicans' repeated and failed efforts to write extreme and partisan funding bills. And that will be true in the 119th Congress as well. We are on the cusp of an agreement to move this country forward. But 2 days ago, a multi-billionaire with apparently no working knowledge of our government or of appropriations, someone who was a self-appointed president of the United States, Elon Musk, issued a marching order for House Republicans to go against their own elected leadership. Shut down the government. Shut down the government. House Republicans are responsible for any harm and uncertainty brought upon the American people. And should some get their wish for a month-long government shutdown, they will be responsible for cleaning up their mess come Inauguration Day. Indeed, we are in completely unprecedented times when someone who has no knowledge of government, who has no knowledge of an appropriations process, who is external to the House of Representatives, can make his weight felt here in turning what was a bill that was on its way, a bipartisan bill, a bicameral bill, was on its way to achieving its goal of keeping the U.S. government open. And the goal, actually, is providing services to American citizens, to working families, middle-class families, vulnerable families, where our responsibility lies. The world's richest man, reaping billions in government contracts, is calling the shots in the Republican Party. At the behest of the world's richest man, who no one voted for, the United States Congress has been thrown into pandemonium. It leads you to the question of who is in charge. I thought that there was a Republican majority in this body, not a President Musk majority. We had a bill on Tuesday that was the result of a year and a half of work, and which had the input, as I've said, of Republicans and Democrats. It represented their interests, the interests of their constituents, their concerns, the needs of their constituents. The bill had no such bipartisan. This bill that we're discussing right now has no such bipartisan input. This was no deal or no agreement, except for among a small group of House Republicans. The bill removes key provisions to limit the power of pharmaceutical companies. That means our prescription drug prices and what happens to the rising prescription drug prices, which families can't get to in order to be able to deal with any illness they have or to save their lives. It removes the provisions to protect SNAP recipients, people at risk of hunger, from the theft of their benefits. It struck a provision from our colleague Congresswoman Wexton to support research into treatments and cures for childhood cancer. For childhood cancer. I'm a cancer survivor. I know what it means to have a cancer diagnosis. I know what it means when parents say your child has cancer, and we want to remove the provision that supports research into treatments and cures for childhood cancer. It drops necessary pandemic preparedness and response programs, including the Strategic National Stockpile. I know something that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are very concerned about and always work to protect what we do with the Strategic National Stockpile. Also, it drops the necessary efforts for our hospital preparedness programs. And that's hospitals all over the country. And I might add, where that's really a big problem is in rural America and hospitals, which were clamoring for these efforts. And as well, shortchanges programs to prepare for future public health emergencies like bird flu, which we now know is striking people on the west coast of this country, California. This bill also abandons our bipartisan efforts to ensure American dollars and intellectual property are reinvested in American businesses and workers instead of fueling the Chinese Communist Party's technology and capabilities. I am deeply disappointed that this bipartisan priority was abandoned after President Elon Musk bullied Republicans into going back on their word. Musk, who got rich off of $20 billion in federal contracts for his companies, he now makes half of his company's cars at Tesla. Tesla's $7 billion plant is in Shanghai. He clearly does not want to have to answer any questions about how much he plans to expand his business and businesses in China, and how many American technologies he plans to sell to the highest bidder. As chapter and verse, many more pieces of fact about his relationship with China. And he has spent last few years cozying up to the Chinese Communist Party to protect his own business interests. The fight is not over. This is something that simply must be done to safeguard our supply chains and our critical capabilities. American policy should be set on behalf of America's workers, not billionaires who cozy up to communist China. We must immediately return to considering the bipartisan, bicameral compromise legislation that Speaker Johnson, Leader Schumer, Leader Jeffries, Leader McConnell, and I might add, the four corners of the Appropriations Committee. That means the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, myself as ranking member in the Senate, the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committees, Senator Murray, and the chair of the ranking member on the Senate side of Appropriations, Senator Susan Collins. This is the group that constructed the deal on behalf of the American public. And those services are now being shortchanged. We must unequivocally reject the illegitimate oligarchy that seeks to usurp the authority of the United States Congress and of the American people. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Muir.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my good friend, Chairman Cole, for his leadership. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the agreement reached between the two houses, the incoming Trump White House and the Republican-led United States House of Representatives. Mr. Speaker, CRs are not ideal. They are not preferred. But come the new year, we will begin a new era of regular order. As well, I expect we will be working in a concerted manner for the next 4 years, to borrow a phrase, make America great again. As we are all aware, the vacuum of leadership from the current White House has been filled already by the incoming White House. The Trump Doge team also proved to be consequential, Mr. Speaker, rooting out unnecessary provisions throughout this government funding process, streamlining bloated legislation and exposing it to the American people, which resulted in a better, leaner deal and a reduction of pages in the bill from 1,547 to 118. A huge reduction, all done in Trump time. This legislation delivers responsible disaster relief, targeted spending reductions, an agreement to address the debt ceiling, and avoids a government shutdown. Our work will reflect the will of the people to carry out the America First agenda. We must deliver results to show the American people that we are serious about correcting the course of our nation, and this bill is the first step in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman's recognized. Gentleman from Connecticut.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, the distinguished ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Pallone.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard my colleague on the Republican side talk about the reduction in the number of pages in the bill. But what I want to point out is by reducing the number of pages, that's not the issue. They've reduced the help for the American people that's in this bill. That's what the Republicans have done. The beginning of the week, we had a bipartisan bill that provided critical relief for the American people. And from my perspective on the Energy and Commerce Committee, what we had done over the last year was hear from our constituents, had hearings, to hear about what was necessary to lower costs, to provide relief for people that, as you know, feel very strongly that prices are too high, that there's all kinds of problems with corporate interests and websites that are not protecting their interests, not protecting their privacy, soliciting all kinds of things with misinformation. Because we're the committee that deals primarily with health care, with consumer protection, with environmental concerns. And so what we did is we worked on a bipartisan basis to put together in this legislation proposals that would really make a difference from what we heard from our constituents around the country. Now, that's what's been taken out of this bill. And it's been taken out because one man, a billionaire, decided to tell my Republican colleagues that he did not want this bill. I'm not going to figure out why he doesn't want it, but obviously, you know, the types of things that I'm talking about are not the things that he would want in the bill. So what are we talking about here? What was taken out of this bill? Well, first, my colleague, the ranking member appropriations, mentioned pediatric cancer and rare disease therapies, research for cancer, for kids that are facing cancer problems, community health centers, teaching health centers to provide more primary care doctors. Those were extended for 2 years and then for 5 years with more funding for that purpose. Prescription drug reforms. One of the biggest problems that we face right now is so-called PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit manufacturers. What they do, managers, what they do is theoretically they're supposed to work between like the insurer or the individual and the drug companies to reduce prices. But what they do instead is, because there's no transparency, what they actually do is pocket the money that they've negotiated, the savings that they've negotiated for themselves, rather than give it back to the consumer. And so what we did on the Energy and Commerce Committee, we said, no, we want reform of PBMs that basically is sort of a way of saying that they cannot, if they negotiate savings, that has to go back to the consumer to lower costs for prescription drugs, which is one of the biggest things that people are concerned now. Their health care, one of the biggest costs that they have in health care. So these are the types of things that have been taken out of this bill.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I would be happy to give the gentleman another 30 seconds, another minute if he needs it. Okay.
These are the types of things that have been taken out of this bill. Health care protections, consumer protections, environmental protections, safety protections. These are the types of things that have been taken out of this bill because some billionaire, richest man on earth, decided that he didn't want those things. This has now become a bill that has taken out anything that is important, essentially, for consumer or health protection or for relief to lower costs for the American people. And thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman reserves.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, distinguished gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stolber.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, tonight, let's put the politics aside. We're here right now discussing a bill that has very good things in it. As my good friend Mr. Cole says, let's not fight about what's not in it at this moment. We know that Democrats had priorities in it earlier and Republicans had priorities in this bill earlier. But we are going to break the fever here in Washington and stop putting the Christmas tree gifts in at the last minute that costs American taxpayers millions and millions of dollars. Let's talk about what's in it. For the small family farmer, for that dairy farmer from Minnesota that was in my office 48 hours ago, begging us for assistance. This bill will help you and many other farmers across this great country. For the victims of the hurricanes, Helene and Milton, who are the victims tonight who are sleeping in tents, Mr. Chair, because they don't have a house. There is American Rescue. Taxpayers are going to come and help you tonight. Through no fault of your own, you suffered through a hurricane. And the U.S. Congress tonight, the House of Representatives, are going to vote to support you. This is a clean resolution with the debt ceiling. This is what my good friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle wanted just yesterday. So let's talk about the good things that are in it. To our farmers, we will support you, both Republicans and Democrats. To our victims of natural disasters, we will support you tonight. A clean CR, I support this resolution, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. Gentleman from Connecticut.
Reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to my very good friend, the distinguished gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Alford.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you to the chair for your leadership and our ranking member as well, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 'twas 5 days before Christmas and all through this House. Not a lawmaker was resting, not even their spouse. The CR was stalled, the debates full of heat, while a shutdown shadow loomed over our streets. My friends, it's time to fund our defense and aid for our farms and disaster relief to protect our very own citizens from harm. Our farmers work hard. They deserve every chance to grow and to prosper, advance, and enhance. Mr. Speaker, this Christmas, let's give we the people their due, a funded government from leaders who are true. So as we vote on this CR, let's keep this in sight. America first, and to all, a good night. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Oklahoma reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
I'd advise my friend I'm prepared to close whenever she is.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
If the gentleman would understand that I'm waiting for a reserve, but someone else was coming to speak. If you just,
I would ask the Speaker to inquire how much time we have on each side.
Gentleman from Oklahoma has 12 and a half minutes. The gentlewoman from Connecticut has 7.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take a moment to address something my very good friend from New Jersey had to say about what's not in the bill. And again, as another speaker referenced, I always believe you look at legislation according to what's in the bill and don't worry about what's not in it. Make the judgment on what's there. And the reality is, in this bill, we keep the government open. My friends favor that. I hope they vote that way tonight. In this bill, we provide badly needed aid to Americans that are suffering in a disaster. I know my friends favor doing that. I hope they vote accordingly tonight. And as several of the speakers have mentioned, we provide much needed assistance to America's rural economy. So I hope my friends actually support that as well with a positive vote tonight. I also want to point out, and I speak now not as a Republican or a Democrat, but as an appropriator. I, for one, think these very good ideas some people have ought to generally move to the floor as separate bills. One of the reasons people distrust this institution is because we quite often pile things on bills that are totally unrelated. Everything that my friends on the other side and I negotiated in the appropriations area is actually in this bill and actually as negotiated. And I think it's unfortunate. And we do this on both sides. So I'm not trying to score political points here. As I said, I'm speaking as an appropriator. I hope we get back to doing what we should do, and that is move legislation through this body appropriately, as narrowly focused as possible. And these end of the year or end of the session or just before breaks, massive bills, I don't think serve the American people well. I don't think they serve this institution well. And I know many of my friends on the other side actually agree with that. So let's look at this as an opportunity to step back and actually focus on what our job here is. And we have no more important job than funding the government, helping Americans in disaster, assisting folks over a long-term crisis in rural America, and then closing down our business and going home. These other matters should be dealt with next year. And as has been indicated, they're generally bipartisan nature. They ought to move through on their own. And that's just my thought, my reflection. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Connecticut.
Prepared to close. Okay.
Gentlewoman is prepared to close.
Let me just be done with this stuff here. I'd like to take a moment, with the time that I have, to highlight that we did come to an agreement and acknowledge there are things in this bill that reflect the bipartisan and bicameral agreement on disaster relief. And I also might add, as the ranking member on appropriations, we came to agreement on moving forward on appropriations bills. And the supplemental, by the way, includes substantial Democratic wins. And since the summer of 2023, we have been pushing Republicans for a comprehensive disaster supplemental. I am pleased that we have an agreement on $100 billion in disaster aid. And that includes $8 billion for emergency highway funds, including paying the full 100% cost to replace the Key Bridge in Maryland. $2.3 billion for disaster loans for small businesses. More than $3 billion for water infrastructure grants from the EPA and $1.5 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers projects. $12 billion for community development block grants to assist with long-term housing, infrastructure, and economic recovery needs, and $21 billion in disaster assistance to farmers, to producers. And this, by the way, is separate from the agreement on an additional $10 billion for a farm aid. I might add that at the outset of the negotiations, I think it's important to know that there were those on the other side of the aisle who wanted to really cut the disaster effort, even to have to provide offsets for the disaster. That was very real. Democrats held the line and said no, that we would get $100 billion for disaster aid because of how critically important it is. Unfortunately, and I might add, there was agreement, as well as what Democrats talked about on disaster relief. There was also agreement on pediatric cancer and rare disease research, community health centers, teaching health centers, prescription drug reform, pediatric therapies. This was all agreed to. It wasn't that we were saying we don't want disaster, you don't want these. We came to a conclusion that these were all of the pieces that were needed to move forward. I also might add, because I am very concerned about our supply chain and what happens with regard to what we transmit and provide for the Communist Party, for China. And while I support all of the disaster pieces, and I supported all the health pieces, it is maddening that the Republicans walked away from that bipartisan priority, the outbound investment to ensure American dollars and intellectual property are reinvested in America's businesses and workers, instead of fueling the Chinese Communist Party's technology and their capabilities. And that, again, which can be documented, is something that is critically important, that it not be there to Elon Musk because of all of his efforts and contracts that he has and the work that he has in China. That should not enter into how we craft a bill that serves the American people and American workers. It is unfortunate the way that this process has worked out. You know, we want to, and we really need to rely on each other. We need to rely on each other to keep our word. That when we have an agreement, that we keep that agreement. said this as well yesterday. I think all of us know here in the Congress that the only thing that we have is our credibility and our word. That is what allows us to move forward, to trust one another, to move forward on legislation that helps and serves the American people. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin and reiterate a point that I made earlier, and I know my good friend from Connecticut and I may disagree tonight on this particular incident, but I think as a broad principle, we probably do agree that it's much better, honestly, as an appropriator, when we are not carrying everybody else's weight. You know, sometimes the mule finally breaks down. And I would just tell my friends, working in good faith, and particularly in bipartisan bills like we had in WIOA reauthorization and some of the health issues that were mentioned earlier, please bring your bills to the floor under your own time. Don't try to catch a ride with us right at the end. People hate that. Our own members don't get a chance to read the bills in some cases. The public doesn't get a chance to have a full debate on the issue. It's simply not good governance. And I would actually argue that this legislation is focused and easy to understand and easy to read. The parts that are important to it are really only about 130 pages. Those are the things that the Appropriations Committee did, and we did it in a bipartisan fashion and a good faith debate, and all of those things are in this bill. I tell my friends on both sides of the aisle, so I say this again, not in a partisan sense at all, but remember, if you vote no on this bill, you are effectively voting to shut down the government. If you vote no on this bill, you're effectively voting to deny assistance to Americans who suffered enormously from natural disasters. If you vote no on this bill, you're effectively voting not to help rural America in a time of crisis on our farms and ranches all through the country. So the stakes are pretty clear here, and I'm hopeful on all these things we agree. We don't have any partisan disagreement. These are things that we agree on. And there's nothing in this bill, certainly that my friends on the other side disagree with. There may certainly well be some other disagreements here or there, but broadly speaking, this is something we should do. None of us, or most of us, do not want to shut down the government. Not a good thing for the country. So I can go on and we can get in a debate, and I'd like to be, in the give and take of debate as much as anybody else. But it is, after all, the holiday season. I know I have members that are anxious to get home, be with their families and their friends in the holiday season. So I simply want to conclude by wishing everybody a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, whatever would be appropriate in your faith tradition, and hope that you have a wonderful and blessed New Year and that we have a great year for America in store ahead of us. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields.
Amen.
The chair wishes to express appreciation on behalf of the House to members for the tone and tenor of tonight's debate, and express appreciation to the staff on both sides of the House for working through these last 48 hours. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill 10545? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The gentlewoman from Connecticut, for what purpose do you?
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 366, the nays 34, one member voting present, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Mr. Speaker.
What you saw here was a test job. They're going to fight this like getting harm. They're going to fight this fight on many different things. The political dynamics is so symmetrical that House majorities is perilously narrow for House. That's the right problem. President Trump is still going to make some requests.
I think it's important to talk about what the debate in this bill. And remember, the Congress doesn't function the way it's supposed to. Things are supposed to move in regular order. It's supposed to have committees involved, a committee process by which members can be heard, an amendment process on the floor. This isn't a new thing. This is not a limit for 118 Congress problem. This is happening during the first Trump administration as well. Of course, during Biden's term too. And so now we get to the end of the year, and typically what happens around here is we have one last-ditch effort to get all of these items in a big package, and that is what you saw happen with this bill. Where members don't have time to read it. If one person has one thing, then you have another member who wants wants to add a completely different provision, and it turns into what many people around here are calling a Christmas tree full of extraneous ornaments. But there are some important provisions that Democrats are frustrated that didn't make it in the bill. Funding pediatric cancer, for example. We saw the Speaker's office retaliate and say, well, Chuck Schumer couldn't put it on the floor in the Senate this entire year. But again, it goes back to our regular order argument, right? We had outbound investments to China. There were some restrictions placed on that. That was taken out of the bill. So you do have provisions that are not included in here that were very important to members of Congress and their constituents back home. But again, this is what happens when you need to make a deal, especially right before the holiday. Yeah, we are out of the prediction business here, especially with what we've seen over the last couple of days. So the vibes, so to speak, are good on the other side of the Capitol. I spoke to Senator Ron Johnson, for example, who told me he doesn't believe there will be any Republicans on the side of the aisle that want to slow things down even further. But again, the way the Senate works is different than the House. You have to have an agreement from all 100 senators to speed through any procedural hurdles that they typically need to go through to pass a bill like this. Nobody wants a government shutdown, but again, we have not had official word yet from Senator Schumer or from the whip, the vote counter on the Democratic side in the upper chamber. See if they will put this on the vote on the floor, when they will put this on the floor. The fact that or pretty much no Democrats voted against this bill, that is a good sign for the Senate and for Democratic leadership there to say, you know what, we're just going to put this on the floor and get it over with.
You're good.
Standing one foot here, screaming here.
Right? Oh, yeah. Our knees are just, you're fine. Yeah.
I might squeeze in between you.
How about if I go this way? Right here.
The stairs here so we can see me in the back. But I just don't want what details are going to want this to be enveloped behind the screen, which is obviously that's what happened here. So
how do you feel with
right now, his hands. Heads up, guys.
Heads up.
Stand here. Okay, sorry. That's perfect. This is luxurious.
I have no idea. But you can stick our heads. You can stick our head. You're great. Your life looks at withdrawal. Yeah. Well, I get a number back here.
Yeah, just a couple of the power is ready, okay.
This time I said it. How about now?
Perfect.
Good here?
See ya. You too. Just going on for a few days. Maybe now heads up, but I'm not gonna. Well, retention's no problem. Okay. Heads up. Well, plus, you have to. Yes, for real.
Well, good evening, everybody. We are really grateful that tonight, in bipartisan fashion, with overwhelming majority of votes, we passed the American Relief Act of 2025. This is a very important piece of legislation. It funds the government, of course, until March of 2025. That was a big priority for us. This is America First legislation because it allows us to be set up to deliver for the American people. In January, we will make a sea change in Washington. President Trump will return to D.C. and to the White House, and we will have Republican control of the Senate and the House. Things are going to be very different around here. This was a necessary step to bridge the gap, to put us into that moment where we can put our fingerprints on the final decisions on spending for 2025. We also, in this bill, as you know, took care of Americans who desperately needed and deserved the assistance. We had a record hurricane season. Hurricanes Helene and Milton in particular did dramatic damage across at least 6 states, the Carolinas, Virginia, from Florida, Tennessee, all the way through. And they have been waiting for the federal government to assist. We did that tonight in this bill. We also took care of our farmers, many of whom were on the brink of collapse because of Bidenomics, frankly, because the inflationary cost of their inputs and the inability they have right now to get loans from the banks and the lenders to put their crops in the ground, to put the seeds in the ground in the spring. So we had to take care of that, and we did. We are excited about this outcome tonight. We're grateful that everyone stood together to do the right thing. And having gotten this done now as the last order of business for the year, we are set up for a big and important new start in January. We can't wait to get to that point. We encourage swift passage in the Senate now. They need to do their job as the House just did. We will all go home. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays, and a Happy New Year, because I hope not to see you until we get back after that. I was in constant contact with President Trump throughout this process, spoke with him most recently about 45 minutes ago. He knew exactly what we were doing and why, and this is a good outcome for the country. I think he certainly is happy about this outcome as well. Elon Musk and I talked within about an hour ago, and we talked about the extraordinary challenges of this job. And I said, hey, you want to be Speaker of the House? I don't know. He said, this may be the hardest job in the world. I think it is. But we're going to get through this. We are going to unify this country, and we are going to bring the America First agenda to the people beginning in January. We cannot wait to get started. I hope you all have a great holiday.
Do you still want to be Speaker, Mr. Johnson? How will this be different?